And now I think I'm going to have the greatest privilege that I've ever had since I came into this fellowship. I can't say anything flowery. You all know as well or better than I how I feel right now, so I just simply want to give you Bill. Bill?
With you out there, I join in gratitude for what we have seen and heard and felt in this marvelous hour. As Lois spoke her lines, touching upon the old days and since, I am sure that you apprehended some things she could not say of the fact that she stayed in the cave until the darkness was complete and did not lose her faith. Thus, she symbolizes so many of our partners sitting here. And she kept faith ever since, in many respects, as I have never been able to do. So, Lois, I express to you the thanks of the whole movement and yours truly. There's a tag out front here. Gone. Well, never mind. Has to do with principles before personalities. It is the theme of this conference. Just as last year at Toronto, we had the theme, I am responsible. Well, as Lois evoked images of old time and the atmosphere of those early groups, I got a fresh reminder of how intensely we then tried to practice the principles that would save our lives and subdue our obstinate and erring personalities. Because you see, in this very early time, this was not so much a matter of virtue as of necessity. We knew that we had been and might soon again be victims of one of the most hopeless compulsions, short of utter lunacy, that mankind knows. The stakes were survival. The stakes were the new life that we had just tasted. Could we go on? Well, in those days, things were very simple. So we attended very closely to this business of staying sober and doing what it took to stay sober. We were surrounded by suicides and failures. We were like Rickenbacker and the company on that raft, with the dark sea of alcoholism all about. So we shared the bread and our love and our companionship, to an extraordinary degree, considering our state of development. And 3 years went by. Most had come and looked and had gone away. But there was a hard core who felt and behaved as I have described. As I said, there were no complications. Survive we must, enlarge upon the joys and the gifts we had received. We must. Then we found that we were doing these things because they were right. Because we ought to do it. Many had found in our simple principles, those that antedated the 12 steps, a new way of life. So far, so good. But we only numbered 40. And the number of alcoholics in the world were 20 millions. And in the United States and Canada, 6 millions. What was our obligation to them? This meant a new great step in responsibility. And as we began to shoulder that responsibility, we came in harsh contact with those elements in our former lives that had sucked us under into the maelstrom. Two of the speakers, all of them in fact, Lois, have mentioned book as a source of inspiration. Surely that has been its record. Strangely enough, that volume of inspiration was created by a group of people who had pretty much reverted to the cult of personality, because this brought up questions of money. It brought up questions of authorship when no authors were visible. It brought up questions of prestige. So, looked at in one way, the book project was an unseemly brawl from one end to the other. And from where we were then, and from any rational point of view, it was a piece of lunacy. Who would expect 40 drunks to produce a book about ourselves and our experiences? Who would expect that we would somehow publish it ourselves and keep it for the benefit of the movement? These were not rational expectations. For that reason, 90% of us, by and large, were against the project. We said, they said, let's keep it simple. Now then, a hard core of what I shall call the personality cult, more or less headed up by me, got very insistent that we have this book. Well, time. People say, how are you going to have it? Who's going to write it? So a couple of chapters were drafted. And then it was suggested that only foolish authors tried to publish themselves. The book had better be taken to a publisher. And the call of personality said, well, why give it to a publisher and have them control our literature? Shouldn't this movement control its own literature? Then we began to get into the money angle. Some of us who had real experience in promotion learned with some anticipation that this book could be printed for 1/10 of its retail price, 35 cents a volume, and we figured on selling it at $3.50, very reasonable for a textbook. But that was a terrific spread. So, still bent on publishing the book to ourselves, we went to some of our fellows and said, here are a couple of chapters, and this is the profit margin, and we made up a sort of a Wall Street prospectus, not the kind put out by the better houses, in which it was shown that if you can have them printed for 35 cents and you can sell them for $3.50, and they went out, well, I think the prospectus showed what you'd make on 10,000 just as a starter. Then it showed what you'd make on 100,000. And I had a friend helping me, an even greater promoter, and he insisted on $500,000. How much could be made? 35 cents versus $3.50. Oh, you know, minus some expenses. Well, I'm afraid that those we solicited were not very enthusiastic. They very rightly said, what the hell? Why would you think that we would buy stock in a book that ain't yet written? Well, it was a good question, and something had to be done. Well, about that time, just prior to it, our trustee had been set up. Friends of Mr. Rockefeller and others had helped. So, we thought that if we went up to the Reader's Digest and suggested the great chain reaction that was now in motion, beginning one of the greatest movements of all time, 40 members still, and for respectability's sake, we rang in Mr. Rockefeller. The Digest might give us a nibble, might print a piece, advertising not only the society, but the new book, price $3.50. And this, hitting 12 million readers, would produce volume on the book by the carloads. I don't know whether we ever figured out the profit on carloads or not. Well, that began to fetch the money, even from those who were frugal. And little by little, it began to dribble in, and we actually peddled shares in the book not yet written. $25 a share, par value, and most of the shares were paid for on the basis of $5 a month. And those collections kept my promoter friend and me and that wonderful gal who helped us, little Ruthie Hart, first secretary of our office, in groceries. We even borrowed some money from old Charlie Towns, all on the credit of the Reader's Digest and John D. Rockefeller. So finally, the book was done. but not without great travail. A chapter would be put together, sent out to Akron. Smith didn't shop it too widely. It wasn't so popular out there. Wall Street was about to get into AA, the cult of personality, and so forth, with some reason. But over in the parlor at Clinton Street, those chapters were taken apart and put together again. And on one side, we had the conservatives who wished to produce an almost theological book. And on the other side, my promoter friend and Jimmy Burwell, whose good lady sits over there, were saying, the hell with the God business, spring it on them after they arrive. Give them a psychological book. Well, this was quite a hot spot to be in. I remember getting as far as chapter 5. You know, we had some preliminary chapters, and I finally got to the point where it had to be said how this thing works. So the idea occurred of taking the 6 principles that we had and busting them up in smaller pieces so that the distant reader drunk couldn't wiggle out between. And when they were numbered, the steps came to 12, and I thought, I have done a good work. Just then, in came a couple of recent customers. They took one look at the 12 steps, well larded with God. They said, oh boy, this will never do. So then ensued a prodigious row over the 12 steps. And I had ulcers of the stomach. And the contributions on the stock went down and down. But they could always be revived by this vision of the digest and carloads of those books moving out. Well, we finally got down to the last $500. And that was just about enough to pay the printer a down payment of 10 cents a book on 5,000 books. Of course, we knew we were going to have the Reader's Digest piece. So, the great day was here. The book was in the press. The pre-publication copy had come and gone. And we go up to the Reader's Digest and we call on Mr. Kenneth Payne, one of the editors who we'd earlier on seen, who had promised peace. And we gaily said, well, Mr. Payne, we're all ready to shoot. His memory being a little dim, he said, shoot what? Oh, yes, he said, I remember about the Society of Alcoholics in that book. And you know, actually, we canvassed this quite carefully in our editorial meeting and came to the conclusion the subject was just too hot. And I forgot to let you know. Well, the stockholders were sucked in. The book was broke. Everybody said, we told you so. Lois and I got evicted from our house, where the bank that owned it had become tired. And things were in an awful fix. Now, you see, personalities ran ahead of principles lots of times. So why then did the project pan out in the end? It panned out because, as nutty and self-seeking as some of us were, and this includes yours truly, I was out of groceries, you know, too. The great undercurrent was still there. This message had to be carried, and this could be a prime agent of its carriage. So, the grace of God plus the enormous suffering we knew to be going on within gunshot around us, easily overwhelmed the cult of personality. And this was so strong that nothing could stand before it. Now, we all know that the publication of that volume marked a vast turning point in our affairs. Before, we were preoccupied with our small group, with ourselves, and whoever we could lay hold of by word of mouth. Now we became preoccupied with the world of alcoholism, with the total mass of suffering. How could we make a dent on it? So, these were the motivations that prevented our relapse into the old days, where it was dog eat dog, where it was competition, where it was common, where there was money. We wound up with no money, but we wound up with a message carrier. Now then, at each major turning point in our affairs, when radical decisions had to be taken, not so much changing our fundamentals, but enlarging them and increasing the chances of others to survive. Not only to survive, but to walk through that ever-widening gateway into a new life. At every single turning point, we've gone through the same paroxysm, and it never has hurt us one damn bit. And I say that no longer, on the basis of this sort of experience, should we ever fear each other. Fear, I remember a line, even a line from the big book. I think it says in there that fear is the evil, corroding thread that ran through our lives. Now it is but a step from fear to prudence, from fear to one of the greatest virtues that men know. Prudence is rational concern without worry. And to me, that's the meaning of that slogan. Principles before personalities. Now, like many of our traditions, each of which was not founded upon our good behavior, but founded upon the bad behavior, we learned this same lesson as these traditions took form. There wasn't any wide acceptance at first. The only justification for printing them was that a few of us had been situated over in headquarters where accounts of the terrible strife in those days among the groups, where these valiant attempts to maintain unity, where all of this vast experience poured across that desk, so that the tradition was a teaching by those of us who behaved badly, and that was most of us sometimes. The tradition was hard learned, and it was based upon what not to do. And from there, we could proceed on what to do and to suggest. Hence the tradition. Same thing when this conference was organized. The risks were too great. The trouble would be that the cult of personality and the professional politician would take over. Nothing of the sort has happened. We have these guys and gals. Sometimes I join up myself. But we cannot withstand the tide of truth and dedication. Not a virtue of our own, but a gift of God, which suffuses this society from one end to another. So as we move into the years ahead, let us not be fearful. Let us be prudent. And let's not, in fear or ultra-conservatism, put absurd constructions on things. Right now, we're going through a constant and very healthy debate on the subject of attraction versus promotion. If you wish, you can have promotion spell press agentry, sound trucks, and all the rest of paraphernalia. Or attraction can simply mean sitting still and doing nothing and waiting for people to come. So you must remember that there are very few absolutes in the A program. We shoot for absolute sobriety, absolute anonymity at the top level. We shoot for an absolute in membership. The guy's a member if he says so. But there are a few. The rest are open to interpretation. So let us not put an interpretation upon this valued slogan, principled before personalities, that would make us for one moment suppose that personality as such is to be always to be eliminated, and that the more we can resemble meek ciphers, the greater the virtue, the greater the comfort, the greater stability. I don't think so. Because you see, really, from beginning to end, all of our relationships, all of the fruitful ones, are very personal. When you or I call on a new 12-step job, it's a very personal business. And you're entitled to use all of your powers of example and persuasion with the prospect. You cannot do less. It is a highly personal business. You are not all here because you are the acme of meekness. You are here because you're individuals, and each of you has personalities. But the difference between these personalities here and so many in the world around us is this. We are operating in a frame of principles truthful enough under God's grace to cause us to survive, to live, to love, and to grow. So we must leave room for something called leadership. And let us never be hasty to say that when somebody is loudly in the minority, that they are necessarily wrong because they belong to the cult of personality. Let us not say, because we try to persuade each other, that this is out of order. After all, this is the way of democracy. This is the way, really, of the group conscience. This is the way of trusted servants in a democracy. This means debate. This means the exercise of such gifts as each has. Now then, this sort of exercise of personality within the framework of the principles is the very essence of our life and of our growth. This we know from 30 years of experience. So, let us trust our servants and let us trust each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And certainly anything I might say would be an anticlimax. I would like to thank Herb, Dr. Jack, Bill, Lois, the staff. In fact, I would like to thank everyone in this fellowship for all I and all that my family have been given. And I would like to thank Almighty God who has made this possible. For quite a number of years, I have closed any meeting that I have led with 3 lines that were coincidentally read in that Reader's Digest. And they meant the world to me because they meant my personal recovery in this fellowship. And they went, I sought my soul, and my soul I could not see. I sought my God, and my God eluded me. I sought my brother, and I found all 3. This was fine. And then, like the delegates here assembled, I was blessed by God. I arrived at this conference last year, and I saw our slogan, responsibility to those we serve. And I realized that there was a great deal more involved here than just my personal recovery, that I owed a great debt to every alcoholic who walks the face of this earth. And I really didn't know quite what to do about it, how to approach it. And I found my answer at Toronto. And before I ask you to join me in the Lord's Prayer, I wonder if you would mind rising and holding hands while we recite the responsibility prayer. I am responsible when anyone, anywhere, reaches out for help. I want the hand of AA always to be there. And for that, I am responsible. Would all who care to join me in the Lord's Prayer? Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Snurp knox is the purpose.